One in Three is intended for mature audiences. Episodes contain explicit content and may be triggering as they often include violence and other varying forms of abuse such as emotional, psychological, sexual, and physical. In most cases, names have been changed to protect all involved. Please note, statements and opinions of guests do not necessarily reflect those of my own. Hi warriors, welcome to One in Three. I'm your host Ingrid. Today I have part 2 of Garcia's story. She describes the events following her escape, not only in the immediate aftermath, but how she continued and still continues to heal years out. And guess what? She is in true warrior mode and created a nonprofit to help other victims of DV. She won't stop there though. But don't take my word for it. Here is Garcia again.
Oh my gosh, especially nowadays, right? Maybe back in our days, not so much, but nowadays, yeah, so much. And I want to share a little bit more about my story because it doesn't stop there, right? You would think it does, but it doesn't. So, navigating, post surviving a double attempted homicide, navigating, all of those, I can say uncharted waters because let me rant for a moment. That moment that he was put in handcuffs and taken away, he was immediately transported. He was immediately chauffeured to a place where there was light, heat, a bed, food delivered, and nothing really to worry about other than, who you're in the community with, okay? For me and my 8-year-old and my unborn, I had to worry about where we were going to get food, how we were going to keep the lights on. Was I even going to be able to put gas in the car to get to doctor's appointments? I mean, it was like there was no, here's what you need for essential living. The abuser got that. The criminal got that. Okay? While I'm in line begging for anything that I could possibly get to make sure that we had somewhere safe and something to nourish ourselves with. Okay? So fast forward. I did testify, by the way. It was, you see this strong person or you hear my voice and you feel like, oh man, that's a strong woman, blah, blah, blah. But let me tell you something. When he was brought into the courtroom and we locked eyes, this voice shriveled up and went like this, and I couldn't even look at anybody. I was just facing downward and I was trying to share my story, but I just couldn't because somehow he took my freaking voice away when I saw him. And I don't know how that happened. And thank goodness the judge was like, I've seen this too many times before, but he was out in 2.5 years. So for a double attempted homicide, 2.5 years out, to me, that's nothing. That's still a slap on the hands, but thank goodness it wasn't 2.5 hours that he got out. Okay. So obviously I've relocated several times in my life, and I can say that, moving out is, just that. It's a physical thing. You can move a million times, but you live in your head no matter where you go. So it's very important that you keep your head space as clear of clutter as humanly possible so that you always have clarity around who you are and or who you are not. So your boundaries are moving and growing with you. All right. Now here comes the crazy part. I'm going to fast forward about another 7-8 years from that incident. And here comes another knight in shining armor, right? This time, he wears the collar. This time, he's in the community doing great things with the kids. He has a great career. He's, just very well respected out there, businessman, professional, blah, 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 all the great things, right? Here I am now going for my bachelor's. I'm, almost in a career type path, because I had to let all that go, obviously, when you're fighting for your life. So now I'm collecting all these pieces and I'm finally putting it back together. And, here's a great person in my eyes. And, trust me, they were serenading for almost 2 years before I even, gave a wink of an eye. We were friends, but it was serenading the whole time. Long story short, we ended up at the altar, the only person I married in my entire life. And oh my gosh, were we talking about narcissists in the beginning? About this like chipping away verbally, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, financially, you name it. It was chipped at every single area of my life that I thought and felt like driving off the cliff for a long time in my life. Not that long, because we were not together for more than 2.5 years after the whole thing I do at the altar, because things started to unveil. It takes time for narcissists to really show those colors, and it takes a long time for the recipient to realize that that's what's happening. And I was not clear on who I was. I was questioning who I was as a woman, questioning who I was as a parent, as a mother, as a wife, as, even down to work, like work is where I wanted to be, where I wanted to give my time, where I wanted to give my best, where I wanted to feel better about myself, and, it was very unfortunate the way that, the marriage ended, because it was just another abusive relationship, but disguised as the most beautiful thing that could have ever happened to, a woman with my circumstances, right? I felt like I was preyed upon. I'm convinced that I was preyed upon for many reasons. I was that strong woman that, had my stuff together. I didn't need nobody. So I was that challenge, and then when I was going through the divorce and read the previous divorce paperwork, I just felt like a protocol. I was a checklist. It was almost every single thing that the other wife, had written in her statements, and the things that happened in their marriage. It was almost identical. I said, "Oh my gosh, she could have did it for me. I could have paid her to do it for me." It was sick. So that was, very eye opening to me as well. And not too long after that, let me back up. I'm sorry. In that marriage, which was very short lived, no more than 2.5 years, I suffered, because of the stress that I was dealing with during that time. I also suffered physically, and I didn't know what those physical things were. And when I went to seek the medical attention, remember I told you I was choked and my hips were used. During that fighting for my life situation, my neck was used as a kickstand while my feet were used to thrust my hips up in the air. I had to have 4 surgeries, 1 on my neck and 3 on my hips. So the long-term effects of what you go through from abuse, physically, mentally, spiritually, financially, all of these things, is truly lifelong. And it's really about how you cope with it and what you do about it. So while I'm dealing with this narcissist, I'm over here now recovering from my physical, things from this other relationship, while I'm thinking that I worked through that and I've gotten over it and I'm, moved on, right? Here I am back in my psyche and my emotions about it, because I'm suffering again, but now I'm just getting it from all angles. So what I ended up doing was, just going back to being that single mom by myself, very happy in the smallest space possible, because it's clean and it's us and it's our energy. And my daughter was getting ready to, leave the nest, because she was of 18 years old, and she was like, "Yeah, mom, you raised me, you did your job, but now I can be my own and I'm out of here." Hey, you know what? I don't blame you. I couldn't dictate what our future was going to be. I had you at such a young age. We grew up together. I wasn't able to raise you. We grew up together. That's just what it is. And she said to me, and I'm going to get emotional. She said, "Mom, I hate what happened to you. I appreciate how much you kept me in my childhood. And I can't remember much of anything as it relates to that evening or the abuse that took place. I just hear about it, so I know more about it. And she said, and as much as of a helicopter mom that you were, and as much as you were always right there every time I turned around, you were emotionally unavailable. And I was like, what did you say? I was so devastated because I didn't realize that I was emotionally unavailable. For me, I love so much that I did everything that I could to make sure that you never had to worry, that you had everything you needed taken care of, and that you had everything that you needed to be happy and as a normal childhood life as humanly possible, and that was, and protecting, like, the way that I protected and provided to me was the biggest amount of love that I could possibly show. But my daughter needed a different kind of love. She needed a different kind of emotional attachment. And I couldn't provide it. I had to run a tight ship. You know why? Because we had to wake up at a certain time. We had to be out the door at a certain time. We had to be at home by a certain time. You had to be in bed by a certain time. My homework had to be in by a certain time. I had to be at work by a certain time. It was, I ran the tightest ship you could ever possibly imagine because it was just like that. So it was through her and because of her, her and I went to a class where we learned emotional intelligence, where we learned fierce forgiveness, where we started to understand and unpack trauma and be able to understand more of how to, listen and be available. And so we read the 5 love languages, we applied it to our lives, we applied it to our relationship. And because of her wanting to take me to that class, I never stopped. When she opened that door for me, I just really dug deeper and deeper and deeper into understanding what, and these 5 circles of life that, or 5 components of life that makes you whole. It's the mental, the emotional, the physical, the spiritual. Sorry, it's 4, MEPS. Mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual. If those 4 things are satisfied in your life, you are whole. You are whole. You are whole in happiness. And so I really just never stopped seeking how to be better, because being bitter is easy. So why be bitter if you can really be better? Sometimes we're sabotaging ourselves because we don't want to trust, because we don't want to rely, because we don't want to open up, because we don't want to be vulnerable, because we don't want to give in, because we don't want to share a story. It's all of these because. We have these justifications. But at the end of the day, I realized after going through so much, and I'm still doing it, which is like 10 years in the running here, we're isolating ourselves. It's not anybody else that's doing it to us. It's us that's doing it to ourselves. And that's something that I chose to do. That's a sacrifice I made. I never even had MySpace, never been on social media. I felt that protecting myself and providing for my children was to stay off social media, because as a survivor of a double attempted homicide and testifying and them being out there, I'm not going to advertise who I am, what I am, where I'm at, what I look like, what I'm doing, what I'm wearing, where I'm at with my kids, what my kids even look like. Okay. To me, it felt like I was just advertising and jeopardizing my safety by doing that. So I didn't. And 3 years ago, I was in a life-threatening car accident. I hit a tree dead on because I saw something slipping off the passenger seat of my car. It was soup. I didn't want the soup to spill all over the car. So I went to grab it. When I went to grab it, when your body turns to the right, the hand on the steering wheel turns to the left. I jumped over the center median and I smacked a tree dead on. It could not have been more dead on than what it was. I had a 1% chance of surviving. And the trauma surgeon came in and said, girl, you better play the lottery, because I don't know how in the world you made it out of this. This is a story. And while I'm in ICU, unable to feed myself, lift my neck, my elbow, my ankle, you name it, I couldn't. Okay, I was in ICU for quite some time. And I just kept asking, my creator. Lord, why did you save my life? Why did you think I was worth it? What am I here for? What am I supposed to be doing? Because for crying out loud, I have fought for my life since I was pushed out that womb. And this is the first time I don't have the strength to fight for myself. And you're doing it all. And I need to know why. And I was told, it was delivered to me. I woke up one moment in the hospital and it said, I don't know what it is. I was receiving this understanding that I am being saved to make a difference in other people's lives. Sharing my story of surviving a double attempted homicide while 1,000 miles away from home as a single mom with already an 8-year-old daughter and having nothing and no one and nowhere. You need to talk about it. There's a thing called post-traumatic growth. PTSD is something we all are very familiar with. PTG is something that we're not informed of, is we're not educated on, we're not told. And post-traumatic growth is where you've learned from that trauma, you have wisdom from that trauma, you know that you're not going to repeat that trauma, and how you've grown from it, right? You're wiser, you're smarter, you're stronger. And then what you're doing with that, how you're, talking to others or educating others or, putting out some webinars or whatever it is, you're sharing your knowledge, you're sharing your experience. That's that growth. You're able to talk about it now. You're no longer suppressing or oppressing yourself. And that's what I understood I was saved for. I understood that I was saved to share my story of the double attempted homicide, of the narcissistic abuse, of the journey that I went through, the coping skills I was able to figure out, obtain, and apply, and then put something together like a service that I can really serve this community of people in these domestic violence situations. And so this nonprofit, Confronting Domestic Violence, was born from the ICU room while I was fighting for my life, questioning why I was even saved. And so our mission at Confronting Domestic Violence is to help relocate families when they have a safe place to go, but not the means to get there. And if you don't need those services, we help provide real-time resources for your real-time needs. I know all too well, like I said early on, when you get something that you need for that moment, it helps your circumstances change. But the moment your circumstances change, then so do your needs, because you're living second by second. You're starving. You have food, you feed, and now what? What's the next thing you need? Now you need somewhere safe to sleep tonight. So real-time resources for real-time needs is what we really pride ourselves on, and helping to relocate when you have a safe place to go but not the means to get there is just that icing on top, because a lot of times shelters may be fully booked, but maybe you have a family that's willing to accept you that lives in the same state but 500 miles away or across state lines, maybe whatever. We help you get there, because most of the time you leave with whatever you have on your back, or you resort to homelessness because it's just that bad, but you have that much strength.
Right. I've read so many stories of, and not just stories, these are like posts in support groups where people are mentioning, I'm ready, I need to get out. All the shelters around me are booked. The nearest shelter is however far away. How do I get there? And what you're providing is such an important piece. I was just speaking with a friend who was on a task force for domestic violence and ended up leaving the task force because nothing was getting done. And said, what do you do? How do you advocate for something to be done? And I said, sometimes when you have a task force, you're looking at the gigantic issue of domestic violence and it's overwhelming. there are so many, it's like this intricate web of so many different ways that you can address it. And if you're trying to tackle the entire thing with just one task force, you're not going to be able to do it because there's just too many pieces, and you're going to spin your wheels and you're going to get nowhere. And what I have found, and I probably have said this to you, I hate that thinking of the trauma that so many of us have gone through to get to this community that we're starting to um, create. And it's incredible. I've met so many incredible people that have gone from, like, I was a victim. I was that shy little voice in the courtroom, not barely able to say what happened to me, into this person of like, okay, I survived and I'm thriving now, but then let me take this a step further. And I refer to the listeners as warriors. And so, like, you're a warrior here because you're forging this path of, I know what was difficult for me, so let me forge this path, or let light the way, so that the next person can see where to go. They can see where the resources are. And it may seem like just a small piece of what one person is doing or what one nonprofit is doing, but without all of these pieces working together, we look at this giant web and we get nowhere with it.
You are absolutely right. And you know what I would love to do is really create like a circle of nonprofit organizations that are providing resources to, real-time victims. And, we become that circle of referrals and resources for each other, because I get phone calls that I have no business getting because it's my organization doesn't support what they're calling for. But by golly, I have a whole list right here in front of me of 85 different organizations. It's unfortunately right now it's just in the state that I'm in, which is, California, but I'm looking at expanding that. I'm already doing it. Florida, New York, I'm on my way. But maybe this is something that you and I can talk about, because when we get these phone calls and it doesn't offer lend ourselves to offer our services to those people, I think that it's advantageous for us to say, okay, but hold on, instead of letting you go saying, sorry, can't help you. Yes, I can. Let me give you a phone number that I know this phone will get picked up on the other line. Because too many times in my, when I was dealing with my double attempted homicide, I made over 1,000 phone calls, 1-800 numbers. I was nonstop. I mean, I was relentless. It took me over 8 months, however long it took me. I don't even remember anymore. I'm like 18, something like that. It took me a very long time. And it was not until I found an advocate that understood the state's legislative laws, the state's programs that were available, and they were that like referral resource that tapped in and that knew all of these different programs, that they were able to say, I'm an advocate, DB advocate, blah, blah, blah. I have this client, etc. And then that's how I don't want to say bypass the list, but you're not at the bottom of the list, okay, of the application process. So I'm really big on advocating for advocates. And it's hard. There's not, an abundance of them out there. And fortunately, I do have some numbers and programs that I'm able to offer. But I want to go back to what you said as it relates to those victims, right? So I don't think that victims realize that they're victims, because you're a victim when you're in it. And it's when you're stepping out of it and realizing that that's not for you, that's when you're like, oh my gosh, I was victimized. I was a victim. I was victimized, And then when you're going through that post-traumatic growth journey of like, now I'm doing something with this. I want to get back. I want to do, etc. And that's that survivor. That's that warrior woman that you're talking about. That's that warrior survivor, And yeah, coming together and really bringing awareness. This is October. This is Domestic Violence Awareness Month. talking about it, bringing awareness is great, fine and dandy, but coming together and doing something about it, showing what we're doing about it, letting people know where we are, how to find us, and that there are, resources out there. I think that is what will help make the next movement. you know?
And I'm ready. I think that movement is coming. And, like I said, Netflix did that docuseries, which I thought was, I think it's kind of their series. They had like worst roommate ever or something. So this one is world's worst ex or something along those lines. And I didn't actually watch it on purpose. I saw one little trailer and I was like, oh, that looks interesting. I didn't realize, and it gave a little blurb of, this may contain incidents of domestic violence or whatever. But I didn't realize it's 4 episodes, is all regarding domestic violence. And, when Netflix does something, people start to pay attention. Anything that brings attention to domestic violence and gets people to be more aware and wanting to do something is a good thing. So I do think there is going to be a big movement coming. I think we're going to be part of it.
You know what? Let's just call it into existence. We will be a part of it.
Yeah.
And let me share a couple things with you. So through this journey post ICU, okay? So let me talk a little bit about confronting domestic violence a little bit more. So we are 2 years in launching, 3 years total because since our 501c3. So through this journey in the past 2 years, we have been able to get involved in Domestic Violence Awareness Month back in 2022. We were with the Delaware Ambassadors of Domestic Violence. We supported one of their rallies. I started there. We were in the Wisconsin Coalition of Domestic Violence. We did not a seminar, but like a small like introduction about who we are and talked about, collaborating once we, got off ground a little bit more. We have also had an online summit last year for Domestic Violence Awareness Month in the metaverse. We did a whole summit, a women's summit for domestic violence in the metaverse. Confronting domestic violence has been a part of some international summits as well, specifically talking about domestic violence. So we're going to have one in December again, and then we had one a couple months ago. This was Canada and France. So domestic violence is picking up in Canada quite a bit. Australia is really, really doing a lot of great things in their administration with the resources and projects and things that they're honing in on for domestic violence. I would love to, really make this like a whole international thing if possible.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. The stuff that's happening is like, it's mind blowing. It's getting the recognition that I believe has been needed for so long. Like I said, 1641 was when domestic violence was first brought to Congress. So anyways, I'm going off on a tangent. For California specifically and confronting domestic violence, this is where this gets so crazy. I had a vision statement for confronting domestic violence. I shared our mission statement. That's not changing. Our vision statement was that there would be requirements for actual programs to be in place through OSHA. OSHA has a required, workplace violence policy, that's a nationwide requirement. And it's really primarily focused on, peer-to-peer stuff. And California recently passed a legislative bill, a workplace violence prevention plan, not policy, plan, that is required to be in place as of July 2024. So it's already effective. And they are having Cal OSHA be the enforcing agency. So this is great for multiple reasons because number one, it's a legislative bill. Okay. So it's a requirement across the entire state that this be in place. Number two, it's incorporating domestic violence into this plan. So it's, when I say that, I mean that it's no longer peer to peer. Okay. It's now outside violence coming into the workplace. Now, I'm saying that there's like all these great things, but I know on the flip side, for most corporations, specifically in California, they're like, oh my gosh, another bill. Oh my gosh, more, restrictions or potential fines, because, California is known for that, and it hurts small businesses when it comes to those types of things. But to your point earlier, domestic violence is starting to get put back under that spotlight and be seen as a real problem. And right now, we all need to come together to help prevent this constant cycle. And I can break that down a little bit more. The bill, SB 553 specifically. So there are 13 requirements, elements, and over 30 musts. So it is very extensive and deep. I actually talk to the Department of Industrial Relations pretty much on a weekly basis, because they're the ones that's overseeing Cal OSHA to make sure that the bill is being followed and that they know what type of audits and or hold on, what's the word, not just audits, but also, like the requirements, the written part of it, right, that they're how they're being audited, how they're following regulations. So the important components of here that I want to share, that I really want to hone in on, is that most people understand that domestic violence is the most riskiest call for emergency responders to go to. Okay. Now that this bill is in place and corporations are expected to step in and help mitigate, they are becoming the first responders. Okay. So people like you and I going into the office, we're expected to be a part of this. So the bill is really breaking down what that looks like. My background, personally, my personal background in my professional career has been, I'm a compliance officer for biotech pharmaceuticals. So I am a point of contact for regulatory agencies, and I pride myself in being audit ready at all times. Okay. Number two, I used to have a physical security company. I did high level assessments, more so on access control. Again, physical security, working with corporations on corporate policies, plans, and rolling out training. I also, with this whole domestic violence umbrella, I've worked with Cal legislation for over 12 years, primarily focusing on legislative bills that is all about public privacy and safety. I also was a mayoral appointee that sat on the Citizens Review Board and worked directly with internal affairs and received hands-on training as if I was an active on-duty officer. Did plenty of ride shares and was, involved. So when I read SB 553, I said, oh my gosh, this is my life story. This is everything I know it tied up in a bow. So for a lot of people who are trying to figure out how to depict all of these requirements and all of these musts and put this written plan together and roll out this training, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so easy, and I'm already on it. So I am your SB 553 SME. If you are interested in being compliant with the mandate and rolling out the training for your staff. Now, with that being said, how do you observe and report domestic violence at the workplace? Right? I know I found the workplace as my safe place to go when I was in my situation.
Same.
Yeah, there's food. I mean, there's a fridge, there's a kitchen, there's a bathroom, there's light, there's heat, there's AC, it's your space, it's your environment. You, even if it's a small cubicle or a whole office, you create that environment in that space, and it's almost so welcoming that that's just where you want to be when you know home is the opposite. For me, being that person that went to work as a victim, that went to work as a survivor, that went to work in these professional hats and dealt with managers, HR, CEO, dealing with domestic violence, before this bill was even put into place, you helped at your own risk. It was up to you if you wanted to get involved or not. Okay. So all that to say that, from a a person that's walking into any environment at work, the way that you're, in my opinion, and how I train as it relates to observations, few things, right? If you see somebody who's quiet, but they're coming in early and they're staying super late, there's a open door question. Um, if you are hearing people share their business on the phone, whether it's their personal cell phone and their personal conversation or somebody they confide in at work, most people don't even realize that their behaviors are evidence to them being in an abusive relationship. Okay. And so with corporations now having this requirement to, report and prevent and respond, there's a lot that goes into it, from understanding human behaviors, feeling safe enough and vulnerable enough at the same time, no matter who you are, to actually report it, and then having mechanisms in place to communicate that and have this like response team ready to go. This is not an easy task, nor is it something that a lot of people are interested in getting involved with, but it's a mandate. And it's such a sensitive topic, and you don't know how many people you may be triggering when you're putting out this training, when you're asking them to be a responder, when you're asking them for input, and or when you're conducting drills. There is a potential risk on both sides here. So I go very deep into all of these hats that I have worn in the past and apply it to the training so that people do feel comfortable in the training. They feel confident in what they're walking away with as it relates to observations and knowledge. And that, not only are they audit ready, but they're also ready to, respond if needed. And sometimes that response can just be calling 911 because you don't feel like you are in the position to actually make a difference.
I was just about to ask what's included in the response
Oh
part of
yeah,
it.
it's anything to everything.
Yeah.
Is it something, and this is where it gets murky, right? Because you have a communication channel and then you have a chain of command, but then the communication has to be succinct and clear, because if the perpetrator is coming in through the back door, who's the first person that saw that? Who are they contacting? Who are they communicating with? And then how is that tree being followed, that communication tree being followed? Because ultimately, if what's happening isn't being clearly communicated, the ultimate decision maker is put in a very how do you say, rock and a hard space type of a spot. Because are we going to lock down? Are we going to shelter in place? Are we going to evacuate? Are we going to pull the fire alarm? What are we going to do? So that communication really has to be in place. And each company, like each person, has their own DNA, their own culture, their own way of doing things. It's like a household. Every household runs their, ship their own way. So it's my approach is maximum utilization of available resources. What do you already have in place? Who do you already have in place? Let's do some surveying. Let's see what type of team we can build. Let's minimize costs. Let's save time. Let's utilize what you have. Let's implement what you don't have. So you're satisfying all things. You're satisfying helping someone in a situation. You're also, putting safety first for everybody else that is unintentionally involved, and you are following what the state is mandating, so you are preventing yourself from being fined as well. And then there's a lot of other domino effects that come into play with this, of course. But we can talk about that deeper, because SB 553 is a very large calling. But I think it's going to make waves across the nation, because it's the first state to implement and mandate that corporations step up and step in. Stepping in is that's a pretty hard calling.
There's so much that can go into that. So does the bill address like an imminent threat, like an active shooter types kind of thought process? Or is it, someone's coming in and you recognize they're being abused at home, like their abuser is not anywhere a threat to the actual workplace environment at that time, are they mandating that somebody intervenes to help that individual, almost like a mandatory reporter type situation? Or how is that working?
Yeah. So basically, it's up to the employee if they want to tell the employer that there is a situation. Now, if a coworker, manager, or someone else hears an employee that's going through a situation, then they have a fiduciary responsibility to report it to someone that says, hey, this person is going through a situation that, our safety might be jeopardized while we're at work here. Okay. Because it's definitely bleeding into the work space if it's distracting them from work and I'm overhearing what's going on and it sounds like it's a violent situation, right? Because a person like, me 20 years ago, if I heard somebody and I was just coming out of my situation, I'll be like, oh my gosh, there's somebody else that has, you know what I mean? You don't know. So it really is up to people hearing and observing what's going on and then reporting it so that help can be offered. It's not required that help be given. It's required that it is reported so that it can be prevented. Okay. Now, as it relates to active shooter, of course that falls under, potential, violence. Absolutely. And for most of my competitors, active shooters where they go right away. And I say, yeah, you could do active shooter all day long. That's usually a very irritated previous employee that feels like they were wrongfully terminated or something of that nature. But when we're talking about domestic violence, first of all, you never know how far somebody's going to take it when their emotions are involved. Okay. Secondly, it could be somebody that's being stalked at work in the parking lot. It could be somebody that just wants to piggyback or tailgate somebody coming into the door because they know where somebody else sits and that's where they want to go. Most of the time, that will be quiet. It'll be quiet. So, it's this is where that training goes into play about, listening and observing. So you can identify based on behaviors. I hope that answers your questions.
It does. And I think one of my favorite parts of all of this is the fact that there has to be education on it for them to receive education on what to look for and things like that. That's great.
And it's just something, again, that I feel like we were talking about earlier. It will be a movement. It happens. It's starting to happen. New York already passed, some bills that requires victims to be able to take time off without retaliation to, take care of their legal businesses or their legal business, in court while they're dealing with this kind of stuff. So we're creating a little bit of a ripple effect here, which is actually exciting because I can't say it again. For 3 centuries and some change, we've been talking about putting things into place for victims of domestic violence.
Because it's such a gross topic.
Yes.
I mean, nobody wants to talk about it. I don't know. It's just, there's so many things, like we've taken all these steps throughout history to get to this point. And I think, as much as our society today has a lot of questionable things that people get active in, I think a positive is definitely bringing awareness to all sorts of groups and people that need this attention and becoming more acceptive and wanting to learn more about different scenarios and things. So I think that this is a good opportunity for us to get moving.
Why domestic violence is still not considered, like, why it's still not under civil rights or human rights or something like that is beyond me. I don't understand. So, maybe we should talk to some of the head honchos that, got these other organizations to get these rights over them and see how the heck they did it and how we can just do it for this community. It's so overdue, so needed. Together as a community, it seems like we are the ones that needs to fill the gaps. And I think that's what nonprofits are stepping up to do. But we rely on the community. Because we can't rely on the funding that's no longer being put out there.
This specific community of domestic violence survivors, it doesn't just affect the one victim or the one survivor that was being abused. There are so many people that are affected. And you look at, obviously, children. of these situations. And that generational cycle can continue, which then affects so many other people. And I love that you've been using the term ripple effect. And there's like, you can use it to so many points that we're talking about in our conversation right now. There are so many places that this actually affects that it should be getting more attention.
I want to say a couple more things because I know that we need to close the loop here. The power and control wheel hasn't changed for a long time, and it probably hasn't changed for a long time because it's pretty on point. So I think that that's something that, if people are just starting to gain some awareness or try to understand, are they in some sort of, abusive situation? I will defer to the power and control wheel. Take a look, check it out. Same thing for teen. It doesn't matter how old, teenage, all the way to, to the day you stop breathing, that it's applicable. And, something that you talked about earlier with these triggers and your response in response to these triggers, I want to say that there are two types of triggers out there. There's negative triggers and there's positive triggers. And a majority of us, when we hear the word trigger, we're automatically going to that negative trigger, and I want to talk a little bit about the positive trigger and give an example because it'll go right into the negative side. So positive triggers, think about your favorite song in the whole wide world. What's happening? You're turning it up. Your body's moving. You're probably singing. You've got a smile on your face. That's the positive trigger, okay? So like you were saying earlier, you were doing this mirror work, you were doing these things, and then after a while, you realized you didn't even need to go in front of the mirror anymore. You could just say it, and that was your positive trigger. So if you're playing a song or a sound in the background while you're doing this verbal, affirmation to yourself in the mirror or not in the mirror, if you have some sort of noise in the background playing while you're doing that, yes, then you know what? You can set an alarm for yourself a couple times throughout the day playing that sound, and it'll be an automatic positive trigger for yourself. So I want to take that and use that same analogy for those negative triggers because I want to drop a nugget for you guys here. Triggers reside in your body. You go through a physiological change. That's why I use music as an example for the positive trigger. You're automatically moving. When it's that negative trigger, there's still a physiological change. Your face can turn red. You can feel your blood get hot. You can feel that ball in your stomach, that ball in your throat, the tension in your shoulders. Somewhere in there, it's residing. When you're feeling your body respond like that, that is a moment to take to say, I'm being triggered. As soon as you acknowledge you're being triggered, remember, when you have acknowledgement, then you have options. Do you want to respond or do you want to react? If you react, then that's a knee-jerk action. When you're responding, you're taking a moment to think, okay? When you're taking that moment to think and you want to respond instead of react, think about what do you want the outcome to be? Because your response is going to be a huge part of dictating that outcome. And in that very moment, you are empowered more than probably any other time throughout the day because you are now in control of your trigger and how you as a person are going to present yourself. So you don't have to say, sorry, I didn't mean to do that later. Nobody likes to apologize for their behaviors and nobody's perfect. Of course, we're going to, but that's just a moment in the day and in the time that you have of ultimate power over yourself and what's about to happen next.
And just quickly, I'm going to just say, and when you have that power, guess what? You just took the power away from your abuser. It doesn't matter if you're in the moment with them or if it's 10 years later and you're getting triggered by something because of what happened to you from them. You just took that power away from them. You got it back.
That's right. And as we move into these, calendar days where festivities are taking place and families are getting together, known as the holidays and stuff like that, we all know there's triggers there. Listen, if something triggers you and you feel like you want to come out your skin, just walk out the door instead. You have control. Just walk out. Say, you know what? I'm just not going to do this. I'm not this person anymore. You have control. So just keep that in mind as well. And really, knowing the boundaries. I talked about boundaries earlier. Sometimes when you're so distraught and you don't know who you are, you damn skippy know who you're not. And even when you're in that, survival space, and you're trying to, just kind of sort through your thoughts and feelings about what happened and what life is going to be like, you know, still, even if you don't know who you are during that transition, you still know who the hell you're not, and keep those boundaries growing with you. And with those boundaries, understand if those are non-negotiables or if there are requests. I request you don't do XYZ. This is a non-negotiable. If you do XYZ, I'm doing a Ronin and you're no longer in my life, period, washing hands, nothing else at the end. You protect yourself the way you would protect your babies.
That's right. So I want to say one more time, I want to ask you what your nonprofit is again and what you do, just so we can kind of remind everybody like what you as in your warrior pose, what you've done.
Thank you so much. So I am the executive director and founder of Confronting Domestic Violence. Same thing on the internet, confrontingdv.org, confrontingdomesticviolence.org. All take you to the same website. Our mission is to provide real-time resources to real-time victims and offer relocation services when families have a safe place to go but not the means to get there. We really hope to build a full circle of resources with different organizations to be that full circle of services for victims. And we are hosting our very first gala on October 27th. It's so exciting. The theme is A Taste of Old Hollywood. So show up in your Gatsby gear and have a great time while we, bring awareness, raise funds, have this go towards the mission so that we can support the community. We have a keynote speaker, Shattered Without a Mark, going back to that narcissistic behaviors and abuse. We also have an honoree, someone who has written legislation for, over 30 years, really making an impact in the DV community. There's just going to be a lot of greatness there. So coming out and supporting us would be amazing. We are also in domesticshelters.org in their directory and multiple places. And yes, I also offer the SB 553 consulting for California organizations and really any organization that just wants to have this type of plan in place as it relates to, the culture of their company and how they want to, serve their employees.
I love it. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for coming on. And I hope that maybe we can do this again because I know we have so much to talk about. And especially as this movement that we actually are going to be a part of, as this starts getting going, I'd love to have you back on. I appreciate your time.
Thank you so much. I think we just made a commitment on a podcast.
We did. We can't take it back now.
We can't. It's public now.
Everybody knows.
This is great. And you know what? And I will put out there, we met through another person that runs a nonprofit organization, and this is a part of that community that we're building. We are already giving and connecting resources with other resources so that we can come together, connect, have synergy, and give and serve. So what a beautiful way to tie this whole thing up to show that we're actually doing what we said we want to do. We're actually already in motion.
We are doing it. We're in the midst of it. And that person lives in yet another state.
Yes.
So it's so cool. Like I said, I hate the trauma that any of us have had to go through to get to this point, but this community is pretty badass. And I'm really excited.
This generation will be the next big footprint. I'm excited.
Me too. Well, thank you again. And I'm looking forward to talking again in the future.
Yes, likewise. Off this and on this.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you heard it here first. We are apparently starting a movement. Come join us. Like we talked about, there are so many pieces to this web of domestic violence, and each one is incredibly important. Perhaps your piece is sharing your story. Maybe you have additional information, resources, or talents. Hey, we will take whatever you can offer. But for now, thank you for listening. A. Garcia's bio is attached to her episodes on the 1 in 3 website. I have included the link in the show notes. I will be back next week with another episode for you. Until then, stay strong, and wherever you are in your journey, always remember, you are not alone. Find more information, register as a guest, or leave a review by going to the website 1in3podcast.com. That's the number 1, in3podcast.com. Follow 1 in 3 on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at 1 in 3 Podcast. To help me out, please remember to rate, review, and subscribe. 1 in 3 is a .5 Pinoy production. Music written and performed by Tim Crow.